Okay, so it is my pleasure to introduce the next speaker. But before I do that, I want to make a comment that I couldn't make this morning in the rounds of questions for time. And the comment was about all the scientists and people who are doing their studies in science and want to do science policy. There are great programs to do exactly that. One of them is the AAAS Fellowship. So if you are interested on that, I'm glad to give more information for all of your students in the back of the room that want to learn what is science policy. There was another one called the Mirzayan from the National Academy of Sciences, but it was canceled because of funding problems. But there are still some programs to do that. So if you're interested, please come to me. So for the next speaker, I will be very brief, is Bob Doppelt. He's the executive director of TWIG, the Resource Innovation Group. And he also teaches systems thinking and global warming, planning and policy. So I've known him for something like 2 years, and I was very impressed by his talk and his way of looking at these issues. I was in one of his book reviews in Washington, which is actually the same book that he has in the slide here. So I do hope that he's going to talk about it, and please welcome Bob Doppelt.
Thank you, Bruno, and it's nice to be here. It's always a daunting task to be the last speaker on the last day of a 3-day conference. So I'm going to try to actually engage you all and do some things so that maybe you can sort of get your energy back a little bit so you can go out and get some beers and wine after this. You've had 3 days of discussion about climate science, climate policy, et cetera. I'm going to try to summarize everything you need to know about what climate change is and what we can do about it in 2 very simple procedures. Let me see if I've got this correct. So first of all, a simple way to think about sustainability. We got all these details about what climate science is and climate change, et cetera. I think one way to think about it is always consider the blue marble. Who knows what the blue marble is? Where'd that name come from? Well, you know it. Anybody else? The Apollo 17 astronauts. This is the first picture of our home, the Earth, ever taken as a standalone unit by the Apollo 17 astronauts back in '72. And they said it looked like a blue marble, so that's how it's got its name. Now, look very, very closely at this picture. Do you see any intake valves that allow us to take in resources from somewhere else if we use up all of our resources or contaminate the resources we have? Anybody see any? Hard to see. Now look carefully again and see if you can see any discharge valves that allows us to get rid of our pollution and waste and toxicity out to somewhere else. Anybody see those? No. So everything we do on this planet or make on this planet stays with us somewhere in some form, either on the immediate, right on our soil, in our water bodies, or in our immediate atmosphere, with a few exceptions. There's a little bit of escape. And think about that in terms of everything you do, everything you make. It's going to have an effect right here where we live. And our challenge today, and I think you've heard about it for the last 3 days, is to move from a very centralized, what I consider an ecologically and socially violent take, make, waste economic system, where we take resources from the face of the earth, we make them into goods and services for humans, and spit out massive amounts of waste that are mostly toxic waste back into the same blue marble that we rely on for all our services, ecosystem services and resources. We need to shift from that to a nonviolent, a very distributed and collaborative, what I call a borrow, use, return system, where we're temporarily borrowing resources from nature, using them for human purposes, and then returning them in as good a shape as we can in a way so they can continually be recycled. So that's what the challenge is all about. Now, I'm not going to talk much more about climate science or ecology. I'm actually trained as a counseling psychologist and worked for many years in that field and as an environmental scientist. So I've actually combined those two fields my whole career. I'm going to focus on how you can think about a framework you can use to think about how to make the changes in thinking and behavior you need to do to make this shift, and how you can motivate other people to make a similar shift. And the simple way I'm going to give you to do that is to ask you to play along with me for a second. So first of all, everybody raise your hand and just wiggle your thumb around, if you would, a little bit, just to loosen it up. Okay? All right, now, we want to do some thumb wrestling. If you can find a partner, just turn to somebody close to you, if you're willing. You don't have to if you don't want, if you got a bad thumb or whatever. Everybody do some thumb wrestling. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. And I want you to get as many pins together with your couple as you can in 30 seconds. So find a partner if you want. Ready? Go. Count your pins. Okay, 30 seconds is up. So how many did you get? How many did you get? How many pins total? 2. All right. Anybody else? Anybody else? 3. Anybody get a whole lot more?
81.
How much? 81. How many did you get? 80. Okay. So what were you thinking when you did, what was your mental model, if you will, the thinking when you got to 81? How did you decide to get that far?
Because we went cooperative. You gave us a challenge and we thought, so we will cooperate.
Okay, so that we work together and we'll get that. Why did the groups that ended up with 2 and 3, what were you thinking? What was your mental model? What's that? Wanted to beat her, right. Okay, any different? Sort of a competitive framework? I win, she loses, they lose, etc. Is that correct? Okay. That's all you need to know about what we need to do to resolve climate change. Okay? That if we work together and each try to maximize the other's well-being, our well-being will also be maximized. If we focus just on ourselves, whether it's our own personal actions, whether it's our own company, organization, our city, or our nation, we're all going to lose. Okay? I call this a fundamental shift from me-based thinking, where it's all about me, what I want, when I want it, any way I get it, to we-based thinking. And there is no way we're going to solve this problem without a fundamental shift to we-based thinking. And that's what I want to focus on the rest of today and the time I have. Thank you for playing along with that. Actually, let me stop for a second. I want to ask you now a couple of questions. How many of you think you know what drives your behavior? How many of you think you know why you do what you do? Just raise your hand. You're sort of an honest guy. All right. How many of you, so I just saw very few hands. How many of you think you know how to change your behavior? So when you want to lose weight, you can lose weight anytime. You want to get more exercise, you can do that. And you want to stop smoking. How many of you think you know how to do that? A few more, okay. And how many of you think you know how to, how many of you think of yourself as your role being to motivate others to change their way of thinking and behavior? That you're trying to be a climate advocate and get out there and engage other people and really make things happen. So a whole lot more, right? Now think about that disconnect. We're not sure what drives our own behavior. We're not sure how to change our own behavior, but we think our job is to go out there and motivate others to change theirs. That's a problem, right? So we have to think very carefully about what change really means. And I want to provide a framework for how you can help yourself first and then other people change their thinking and behavior to address the climate crisis and a number of other issues that we're facing around the country, around the world today. And the framework I want to provide is based on a combination of long-standing psychological principles and social psychological principles sort of mixed in with ecological principles. And they're based on what I call combining that all, a set of natural laws. There's a lot of terms or uses for the term natural law, but what I mean by that is the natural laws are universal truths about how we humans are going to have to interact with each other and with the natural environment today and for the immediate future if we're going to address this problem successfully. And each one of those natural laws leads naturally to a commitment each of you can make, the university can make, your family can make, the companies you're working with can make, and are making, as we've seen and heard the last 3 days, to address these issues. And then there's some skills and competencies that I will talk about that you can use to make this commitment. So before I dive into that, I just play along with me one more second, if you will. Everybody take a deep breath, okay? Just relax, and end of the day, I see some yawns. Yawns, okay. Two, just a nice deep breath. And take one more. Now, how many can take to tell me what just happened? What actually physically just happened? Anybody? A lot of oxygen. Okay, you breathed in oxygen, right? That's what actually was happening. Most of us don't realize that it's oxygen that actually gives you the energy that allows you to live. Oxygen detoxifies your bloodstream, it metabolizes the foods that you eat, et cetera, and turns it into energy. So oxygen is really the key to life. If you don't believe me, let's all hold our breath for about a minute. You can last a long time without food and water. You can't last long without oxygen. How many know where that oxygen came from? Where'd it come from? Go ahead. Scream out. Scream it out. From the water. Where in the water? Okay. Okay. From single-cell green algae through a process called photosynthesis, and about 75% of the oxygen on Earth is produced in marine environments through this process. And the other 25% comes through vegetation all around you with the same process. So complex interactions occurring in the oceans and estuaries and vegetation all around you are generating the oxygen that allow you to live right now. How many of you walk around all day going, thank God for the oceans and that oxygen? You know, I'm alive because of that. Most of us don't think about that, right? But that's reality. And it is the first natural law, the law of interdependency. There is no escaping this natural law. We exist only because all of these other processes exist. In fact, here is a fundamental truth. Nothing exists on its own on our planet. Not you, not me, not this table, nothing. Everything is created by and sustained by other processes. And that is the natural law of interdependency. The ecological systems that exist on Earth created you and sustained you, allow you to live. And the social systems you're involved with, your family, your friends, etc., they are what provide meaning in your life. Thinking about what you spend most of your time doing. You spend most of your time thinking about whether other people like me or not. Am I getting along with folks? What's my relationship? It's our social systems that provide the meaning and our ecological systems that make it all possible. So we are completely interdependent or dependent on these systems. And as we heard in one of the presentations before, the commitment, the starting point is to see the systems you're part of. We have caused climate change by burning fossil fuels and cutting down forests without thinking about the impacts of those actions on the ecological systems we're part of. And it's critical that we begin to do that, to take that, and there's very clear-cut tools that you can use, systems mapping, whole systems mapping and systems thinking that I teach at the university, and that's what I teach my students. We run systems thinking classes, and I have students map out their social systems from their family units on out, and then the ecological systems, and then business systems, et cetera. How many of you have done systems mapping? Anybody? I would strongly suggest you start this. You start with a back of the envelope thing at dinner tonight. Put yourself in the middle of a piece of paper. Put your name on it. And then just write around you all the different people that are part of your immediate social system, maybe your family. And then to evaluate what's the relationship between you and everyone else. Is it good, bad, middle? And you can begin to sense how your social system functions. And you can go from there. Very simple, straightforward processes. Unfortunately, most of us don't think in that way. Most of us don't think about the fact that we're actually embedded within social and ecological systems and wouldn't exist without it. And so we don't pay attention to the effects of our actions. That's exactly what's happened and why we've caused climate change. Despite knowing about the greenhouse effect for over 100 years, we've continued, even today, to spew tremendous amounts of fossil fuel, CO2, greenhouse gases, because we're not taking into effect, taking cause and effect into account. That's the second natural law of sustainability, the law of cause and effect. Especially today, with the over-maximized ecological systems we're part of, the overcrowded systems, social systems that we're part of, every action has an effect on the systems we're part of. And that's the second commitment we need to start making. We need to begin to account for all of the impacts of our activities. That means of our policies, of our technologies, of our practices, of our personal behaviors on the systems we're part of. And there are also some tools that you can use to do that. You can use fishbone diagrams, which means you put the problem or the step you're taking at the end of looks like the end of a fish skeleton, and you work backwards from there trying to identify all the possible consequences. Life cycle assessments do that for entire products. And when you do that, you want to make sure you do full disclosure. You're never going to be perfect with a systems map. We just don't know. We won't know all the systems in all the way, but it really helps you expand your thinking and then try to expand your understanding of your possible consequences of it. The more you do this, the more you begin to get become more aware. Now I want to have you go on a journey with me briefly, okay? I want you to imagine that a genie has come and taken you away from your role as a student or a faculty member or staff at Notre Dame University, swept you up and made you the most powerful decision maker on earth, okay? At your fingertips now is all the information you could ever want to make a decision about what's going to happen, and whatever you decide is going to affect everything on earth. That's some of you would be actually pretty good in that role, probably. So think about that. Imagine that now. How would you make decisions under that circumstance? Anybody? One other thing. Excuse me. This genie has unfortunately given you a special form of amnesia. You cannot remember who you are, what your name is, where you live, what your social or financial status is, what your religion might be, whether you have kids or not. You don't know what continent you live on. All you know is that whatever you decide is what's going to happen. Now, how would you make decisions under that circumstance? You're the most powerful decision maker on earth, but you don't know who you are. Anybody? I know it's late. It's 3 days, but somebody's got to have an answer. Go ahead. Talking to people. Okay. Others? Do what's best for everyone. Okay. Anybody else have an alternative? I think that latter answer is pretty good. I think you would probably adopt something similar to the age-old moral principle called the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, because those others might include you, right? You don't know who you are. And as far-fetched as that scenario sounds, what I described is more or less the reality of the conditions on Earth today. We here in the United States, I drove a car from O'Hare Airport down to Notre Dame here and was generating greenhouse gases. And the greenhouse gases I'm generating are going up and contributing, adding to the concentrated emissions in the atmosphere already and adding to climate change and affecting people in India, in China, everywhere else, and they don't know that I decided to do that. And vice versa, people in China are spewing out greenhouse gases and and affecting us, and we don't know what's going on. We're in a very different era, one that humanity has never entered before. This was not even true 50 years ago or 30 years ago, but it is true today that what we do can have profound effects on the systems we're part of in ways we can't even expect or predict. And so we have to begin to think about what our moral response to that is. And I know you've talked about moral principles throughout the conference, but that's the third law of moral justice, that we really now have to decide what our moral and ethical response is going to be. And I think the starting point that you find in, and I looked very closely and extensively at this, in every religion that I could look up, and actually embedded in most laws of most countries on Earth, is the principle that you shall do no harm. When we still had police out on the streets, you couldn't go out and harm somebody out in South Bend, right? You'd get arrested. You can't do any harm. And that's got to be our starting point. Do no harm on the systems we're part of. And we have some practices and competencies that are emerging in that field. We're trying to become carbon neutral. We're trying to go to zero waste, zero discharge of hazardous materials. We know it's tough to just stop doing harm. But that's the first step. Most of the spiritual leaders on Earth have always told us, even if you can't do good, at least try to do no harm. We're not ever going to be able to never do harm. But again, this framework I'm laying out for you is about expanding your awareness and becoming more and more aware of the many ways in which you might be contributing to harm to the climate, which affects everyone else, to ocean acidification that affects everyone else, or directly to other people. Now I want to have you go on another journey with me very briefly and go back to the blue marble that we first saw, okay? And think about what is happening with that picture. That climate scientists here at Notre Dame, certainly the scientists I work with out in the Pacific Northwest, one of which is now on staff here at Notre Dame, Ellen, have begun to talk about the fact that the cumulative effect of human activities on Earth for the last 100, 150, 200 years are now to the point where what we do will determine the fate of all life on Earth, not natural processes alone. This is called the Anthropocene. How many of you heard of that term? Some of you. And that is the first time, the first geological era ever, if you will, where what we do to respond to climate change, what we do to respond to ocean acidification, to biodiversity loss, will determine what species live and what die, or how many live and where they live, and how many people live and die, and how they're affected. And that means, if we are now in the Anthropocene, which I think we are, that means we're now the trustees. That wasn't, again, true 50 years ago, but we have now globalized environmental problems through ocean acidification, through biodiversity loss, and certainly through climate disruption. And that means we're in charge. And we have to accept that we are now the trustees. What we do as a trustee is going to determine future life on Earth. And that leads to the fourth commitment, I can't count, is to accept your trustee obligations and do good for all life as well. So the first is we've got to stop doing harm. But at the same time, we've also got to put a big effort on doing good. And we have some practices and competencies, and these are just a few examples. Biomimicry, trying to create products and services that mimic the way nature works. Green chemistry is using natural processes, natural substances to provide the same services that are toxic, often toxic chemistry does today. Moving to 100% renewable energy that's distributed energy. What I see, and I do a lot of work with public and private organizations on change management, and we're going to talk about change management here in a second. I see most organizations are still focused on do no harm, still trying to figure that out, and often they're just trying to tweak their systems. They're working at 15% increase in recycling, maybe a 10% move to renewable energy. We need to go beyond that quickly, but we also need to start thinking about how do we become restorative? How do we create systems that actually, products and services and economic systems and social systems that actually help restore the climate, restore natural systems, because we're sort of in a hole and we need to move out of it. So we need to first do no harm, but then start to do good. And the more you can start to do good, the better. And we can talk about these in some questions and answers. Now, the good news is that every society, or many societies throughout history, have made fundamental changes in their thinking and behavior. And when they did that, the vast majority of the people in those societies ended up better off. Just think about it. You know, we once believed that, that burning people at the cross was a good thing, you know, and kept the evil spirits away. We overcame that. We don't see that much often. Societies have built their economic systems, their social systems, and other systems around flawed beliefs or erroneous beliefs and thinking many, many times. Often they came out of the conditions of the time, and then we realized later that those conditions had changed, and they switched. Every time people were in the midst of one of those changes, they couldn't imagine a new way of thinking and behaving. But after the change came about, everybody thought it was natural and perfectly logical. And I mean, it's not always been this way. And that's because of the final law, natural law of sustainability, the law of free will. It seems impossible to change this huge ship we're on, the direction of this ship, and address issues like climate change and economic inequality, et cetera. But we are free to choose to change our thinking and behavior any time we want. In fact, for those of you in the business world, you know that it's when a company or a leader decides to move outside of the traditional social narrative, the traditional cultural belief, and just go a completely different direction that they change the market and usually end up pretty wealthy. So we are free to change our thinking and behavior anytime, and that leads to the fifth and final commitment, which is to choose your own destiny. You do not have to be constrained despite all the obstacles in the way. Just keep at it, and there are numbers of tools and competencies we can use for this commitment also, one of which is the pyramid of change that I'm going to talk about right now, and sustainable governance, as we can come back and talk about. So here's a system, 5 principles. See the systems you're part of. Try to understand as best as you can the impacts of your behaviors or your organization's behaviors, whatever, and actions and technologies on the systems you're part of. Then adopt the moral principle to do no harm, and the principle, the trustee principle of do good, and realize that you are free to change any time. I want you to take now just 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes, with a partner or a group and evaluate yourself on those principles. How often do you follow one of those commitments? How aware are you of the natural law? And where might you be stronger or weaker? You can do it on a scale of 1 to 5. 5, I always follow this natural law. And 1, I never do it. Okay? And just sort of think about it yourself and then just discuss it for just a few minutes with a partner. All right? You're just trying to get a sense of where you sit on this framework. Then we're going to talk about how you can change your thinking and behavior and how you can motivate others to do it too. So just take 1 minute and think about it. Okay, if I can interrupt you, sorry about that. We don't have a lot of time. Anybody want to share anything? How many of you ended up with all 5s? You were always doing each one of those, following all of those commitments. Not many people. How many of you were all 1s? All 1s, all right. And how many of you were sort of in the middle? And that's where most people are. They're in the middle somewhere. Some lower, some higher. Anything stand out to anybody that want to share? Any particular, something come up for you as you thought about it? Go ahead.
Cause and effect. It's really tricky. It is, one, it's very difficult to know, and 2, our choices are sometimes very limited.
Right.
It feels like we get to choose between the lesser.
Right. Absolutely. The point that she was making, thank you very much, is that it's often difficult, very difficult to know the effects. Sometimes the effects of our action are unintended. We couldn't expect it. Or sometimes they're long in the distance. You know, there's a delay. And often the choices we have don't seem like we're choosing between the two bad things. You know, we really don't have a good option. All of that's true, which is why, first of all, the more you can start to map out the possible consequences, the more your awareness will grow. You'll never know them all, but what you will do is expand your consciousness to always be thinking about that issue. And most of the time we're not. We just sort of focus on me and don't worry about the effect on everything and everyone else. So the more we can expand that, the better. And when you do that, I'll give you an example here of a business I'm working with, my students and I are working with now, where they started to map out the consequences of their systems. They realized they had all sorts of other choices that they didn't think they had initially. Only when you first understood your system and then understood the likely consequences, the direct you could see and even the possible unintended consequences, that, oh, wait, we have a lot of other options here. Okay? So let's come back to it. Thank you very much. So let me talk about the process of change, and then I'll give you some examples. Change happens, one way to think about change is through a pyramid of change, okay? At the top of the pyramid are the results we want, or the results we're achieving. The financial results, the social results, the ecological, the psychological, that is, people are happy or not. And below those results are a set of actions we take. Sometimes we're aware of them, sometimes we're not. The behaviors we're using, the practices, the technologies, the policies that are producing, or that we hope will produce, the results we're getting. And this is where most of us spend our time, right? In school here, you want to get an A, okay, I'm going to read more, I'm going to go get some research on these things, et cetera, et cetera. Organizations are almost exclusively focused on this, except the real smart ones, and hopefully the ones that have learned from this. Is this true? Do you find this true in your experience? This is where most of your time on what you want to do and because you think you want to get certain results. Anybody have a different model? Okay. What we forget is that below those actions are a set of beliefs, okay? Assumptions, values, ideas we have that lead us to act in certain ways. Our values, our assumptions about the world, our ideas lead us to behave in certain ways and not in others, to develop certain kind of technologies and not design others, and not design them a different way, or to adopt certain policies and not adopt others, okay? And below those beliefs are a set of experiences that we've all had both early in life and today on an ongoing basis that shape those beliefs. The experiences that you've all had that shape your behavior most of the times happened within your first 1 to 3 years, and many people, many psychologists believe even in the womb, and you don't remember any of those. When I worked as a counseling psychologist, that was my job. My job, because people would come in troubled, and it was often to help them surface early experiences that were shaping the way they saw the world, that were driving their behavior that they were totally unaware of. Okay? That's what it's about. And if we really want to make a real major transition to sustainability and address climate disruption and so many other ideas, we have to deal with the top of the pyramid of change, but mostly we've got to deal with the beliefs, and the only way to do that is by providing different experiences for people. Okay, you've got to help them, so you want to engage them in different experiences that helps them examine their current way of thinking, their current assumptions, and then maybe expand those beliefs, change them in some ways. So here's a way you can do it. And I do this with organizations all the time. I would encourage you at Notre Dame to do it. You first go through and identify your current status, it's the left side, in the pyramid of change. What are the results you're now getting? What greenhouse gases are you actually emitting, and waste, financial results, the whole suite of results that your organization is producing. Not just your carbon footprint, because actually the carbon footprint is a symptom or the result of a whole bunch of other stuff. It's not the problem itself, right? It wouldn't exist unless you were burning fossil fuels, unless you were creating a lot of, using a lot of materials, et cetera. Then go through and try to identify all the different actions, policies, technologies, practices, behaviors that you're using that are producing those results. Then try to go through and identify the beliefs people hold that are leading them to act in that way or support those technologies or not change the technologies and policy. And then ask what experiences have we had here or before, or that our predecessors had that led them to create the policies and strategies in this way that led to these beliefs. So a good example, this business I'm working with, they're up in Oregon, they're an international company. They have they started off by, we helped them, they mapped out their entire supply chain in their company. Where did their product actually originate from, and how did it move from one part to another all the way to the company facility in Oregon, and then what happened after the company gave it or sent it to their distributors and then to their customers, and what did the customers do with it at the end of its useful life. That's a life cycle assessment, understanding the entire system, okay? Took about 6 months to map it out because they realized, oh, geez, you know, this supplier in China is actually getting this stuff from this group in Taiwan. Well, actually, they're getting some of their stuff in Taiwan from South Korea. So that really took a while, and I'm sure we didn't get it all. Then we said that in this case, we were looking at climate change. We said, so what are the effects of, for example, that value chain, that supply chain on climate change? Well, they added up all of the different emissions and other impacts, including deforestation by trying to get the raw products, and it was an enormous impact. And they thought they had actually calculated their carbon footprint at their local facility in Portland and said, oh, it's very small, and they claimed they were a big green company because they were reducing it. In fact, they had this enormous impact. And so they decided, I said, so what beliefs do you now hold? Oh, we're green, we're good, we're one of the leaders. What experiences have you have that let you think that way? And they talked about the CEO's activities and the pronouncements they make and the nice reports they give, et cetera, et cetera. And then I asked, well, tell me, what is your experience in your organization? What's your CEO do? Well, CEO actually flies around in a private jet. And so what does that mean to you? And now this is about the third meeting, because it takes time to go through this and allow people to share confidentially and feel safe in sharing. And they say, well, what it actually means to most of us is that sustainability isn't really a serious issue here. So everything that happens in an organization is an experience that people have that shapes their belief. And you have to understand that. Everything, okay? Your procurement policies, who gets the attention of CEOs and who doesn't, who gets information and what kind of information is shared, all of that is an experience that shapes the way people think. And so we actually, in this company, we really went through and analyzed that. Then we went through and said, okay, what would a truly sustainable organization mean? What would it look like? And they have to define that for themselves. So they came, what would the results be? Well, we would not create more than 10% of our current CO2 and other sorts of actions. They went, but we'd also be financially profitable, customers would really like us and flock to us and not send us these angry emails all the time, et cetera. What actions do you need to take to get there? What beliefs do you need to hold? How do people need to think in order to engage in those actions and policies? And what kind of experiences do you need to have? Well, they changed their whole way of thinking, and they've adopted, this is a very large company. They have not gone public yet, but they will soon. They have decided to go to 100% renewable energy throughout their entire supply chain. Because it's not just from a climate perspective, but because they want that to be an experience that people have that continue to reinforce a different way of thinking about what the whole purpose of their company is. So there's a way you can do that. It's a very powerful process, and I encourage you to do that. And then while you do that, remember a couple things. First of all change, all planned change happens in stages. And what I mean by planned change is a crisis can occur, or a big thing comes down the pike, and boom, we're forced to change our thinking and behavior. We often call that adaptation. Okay? But if we want to get out ahead of things and make some change on our own before the crisis hits, all change happens all change starts in disinterest. Okay? We don't know we're supposed to change or that a change would be best for us. We often call this denial, especially in the climate field, but it's not really denial. Denial is just one part of disinterest. There's lots of reasons people stay in disinterest, and we better not confuse that. In fact, we have confused that in the climate field. We think all of the folks in Congress and others who aren't supporting action, they're all in denial. That's just not true. And I'll talk about that in a second. But there are certain kinds of change mechanisms that make sense when people are in disinterest and or in deliberation. The next stage of change after disinterest is deliberation. And what that means is somehow a small window has been opened in our minds. And think about your own lives. This is how we all change. A small window's been opened, and we thought, well, maybe it would be best to make a change. I'll consider it. So we start deliberating about it. And there's different change mechanisms that are better suited in these early stages of change. Crisis, a disturbance can do it. Growing your awareness, expanding your choices. Because often people stay disinterested because they think they don't have many choices. The change is too big. And I think that's what's going on with many people in Congress right now. The change is too big, they can't see how to do it. Getting emotionally inspired and having people around you who are going through something similar that you can share that with. A good example is my father-in-law, who now has passed away about 2 years ago. But he lived my wife's from North Carolina, and he lived in this 100-year-old house that was poorly built, and the wind would blow through. He had single pane windows, et cetera. He was spending a lot of money. He didn't have much money, but he's spending a lot of money on utility bills. We kept coming down and saying, Dad, how about why don't you do some insulation? Why don't you put in better windows? Nah, that's all nonsense. That's just not anything I want to do. He really seemed like he was in disinterest or denial. And then once we finally realized, wait a second, I wonder that he was 89. I wonder if it's just too big for him to deal with. So he said, how about if Peg and I show up and spend a week here and do all that work for you? That's a great idea. Let's do it. Bam, we did it. He was in disinterest because he thought the change was too big for him to handle. Okay? There's lots of different reasons. And when people move out of disinterest into deliberation, when they start thinking maybe I should consider a change, what people are doing is weighing, either consciously or not, weighing the pros and cons of change. And the research shows that people have to see 2 benefits for every downside if they're going to make a fundamental change in thinking and behavior. Got to see 2 benefits for every down. There can be a lot of downsides, but there has to be at least 2 upsides. And when you think about it, it's obvious. If the upsides and the downsides are roughly equal, better to dance with the devil you know than the devil you don't. And if the downsides are greater, of course, you're not going to do anything. So you have to really help people understand what those upsides are, and often they really relate to feeling good about themselves. That is to say, living out their moral values. When I talk to CEOs about making change in their organization, they always first start talking about the finances. What's the ROI here? How much is it going to cost? Are we going to make it back? But in the end, it never comes down to that. People make the big changes because they feel better, that they're living out the values that they believe in, and or their employees feel that way, their customers feel that way, et cetera. So don't be fooled by that. So once people decide that the benefits outweigh the downsides, they move into the design phase where they design a plan. Organizations design a plan all the time, right, to make the change. We humans do the same thing. Sometimes it's a very quick plan, sometimes it's fast, it's not. And then you decide to make the change after you make a verbal commitment, usually. Companies put the change on their website. Until it's on their website or until they announce it to their customers, it's not really clear yet that they're going to do it. So some sort of open communication. And in the latter stages of change, that's when reinforcement, substitution, and other strategies make sense. So in the early stages of change, people are not ready to act. And if you push them to change your light bulb, support a policy, et cetera, you're going to move them the opposite way. And that's what we've been doing on climate change for the most part for folks that are still in disinterest or in deliberation. Do this, do that, and we've forced them backwards. And in the latter stages of change, people don't want more information about how bad climate change is. They want help overcoming obstacles because they're in the doing stage of change. So I think we heard this in a previous presentation. I think what we've done with communication on climate change is we've talked to the people at both ends. Most people are in the middle. We have very little communications for them. It's certainly not communications that are linked with the right change mechanisms. And by change mechanisms, I mean mechanisms that can help them decide to move to the next stage of change. And we've pushed people one way and the other and created some pretty significant polarization on it. So it's just one way to think about it. And I'm going to end here real quickly. There are three keys to keep in mind every time you're trying to create or motivate people to make a planned change. There has to be sufficient levels of dissonance. And what that means is we have to feel like where we're at and where we want to be, there's a big gap there. Okay? In my field, the buzzword is no tension, no change. Okay? But if all you feel is dissonance or tension, what are you going to do? You're going to stick your head in the sand. You're going to say it's fake, you're creating it, so you attack the climate scientists, et cetera, because there's two other keys to change too. The second is efficacy. People have to believe we have the skills, the know-how, the tools to do what's necessary to reduce the dissonance. And just as importantly, just what I talked about, the benefits have to far outweigh the downsides. So I think as I look at the research from Yale and others on where the public is now on climate change, I think dissonance is sort of moderate. We have 60 to 70, maybe 75% of the public now thinks climate change is a problem. Whether they think it's a real serious problem, that goes down some. But the sense of efficacy, that we really can, we know what to do about this, and benefits is rock bottom. So it's no surprise to me that we're not making much progress at all. And in your communications, you've got to focus as much on what climate change is and how bad it will be, et cetera, and more importantly, how you're not living out your moral values. As you do on it, actually helping people understand, we know what to do about this in many ways. We can solve this problem, and you're going to be better off when you do this. And we run a communications program in my organization. If you don't know about it, I welcome you all to join it. It's called Climate Access, www.climatechange.nd.edu, where we train people and organizations. We have 1,500 members, including many federal agencies that are involved, where we're helping them develop this kind of strategy. So I got to wrap up, and we've already seen this. I just want to say, don't be dissuaded by the deniers or the dissuaders, that the gloom and doomers. Okay? I think humans always respond late to an issue like this. We always do. This is a big one. This is not one we've dealt with before. But we will respond. A number of options will be taken off the table by that time because we're responding late, but we will respond. There's going to be some bumpy times ahead, but we will all end up better off, I think, because we will have moved from a sole focus on ourselves and to a broader focus on caring for the climate, the ecological systems we're part of, and the people that make life possible. So you might want to think about a pledge that you can make for yourself, a couple of simple words that help you remember all the time, whenever you can, to shift from focusing only on your own needs to also thinking about the environment and the people around you, to think about those 5 commitments. If some type of pledge makes sense, 3 or 4 words, you can write it down and say it to yourself silently. And I always like to end my presentations with a poem that I think is a wonderful summary. There's a vast difference between leadership and management, and people get confused about that. Management, and they're both essential. Management is about keeping complicated systems of organizations and systems and technologies working together to achieve an outcome. But leadership is something fundamentally different. It's about painting the picture of the future on the wall that everybody can see, that they all get motivated to work towards despite all sorts of obstacles in the way. That's what a good leader does. And I want to read you a poem that summarizes that because you are the leaders of the future. Leaders are called to stand in that lonely place between the no longer and the not yet and intentionally make decisions that will bind, forge, move, and create history. We are not called to be popular. We are not called to be safe. We are not called to follow. We are the ones called to change attitudes, to risk displeasures, and we are the ones called to gamble our lives for a better world. All of you are the leaders of the future, and I wish you the best on your journey to sustainability. Thank you.